Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champion Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming, presented by Codename Entertainment and TakeThis.org. This week, Dr. B and I, Treavor Bettis, are joined by Kelli Dunlap. Actually, you know what? We're gonna skip the rest of the intro. Kelli, who are you for the fine folks who may not know?
Well, hello. My name is Dr. Kelli Dunlap. I am a clinical psychologist, so I have a doctorate in clinical psychology. I also have a master's in game design and am a game designer. So I have made games. I have consulted on games, usually around mental health for, obvious reasons. And I also am an adjunct professor, and I teach game design to grad students. And yeah, I like dogs. I have a dog mug. Actually cool. And I blurted out. I promise it's PG. It says dog mom. That's all it says is dog mom.
Just instantaneously, everyone thinks that it's just an inappropriate mug.
Yes. Like my cross stitch earlier. Yeah, so
fun fact.
Yes.
Dr. Kelli is also a significant source of my inferiority complex because
okay, I hadn't
she's
even
amazing.
I hadn't even gotten to the fact that I work at Take This as basically the community manager, but the associate director of community programming is the full fancy title. So
that is a title.
And I do therapy. So I do Take This, I do therapy, I teach. I do a lot of stuff, and it pretty much all has to do with games and mental health in some capacity. So I'm super excited to be here for this topic.
Heck yeah, and we're so thankful for you to take the time and be here, especially for our topic today, which is about mental health in video games. But I do want to let everybody know here in the chat. First off, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions throughout the show, you can put them in the chat with question : at the beginning, and our awesome mods, Martin and Jordan, will grab them and put them in a little text doc that I just realized I don't have open yet, and will open in the middle of the show to grab those.
We're professionals.
We're professionals, yes. But before we get to that, Dr. B, who are you for the fine folks who may not know?
I am, oh God, I've got nothing pithy to say about that after Dr. Kelli's introduction. No, seriously, Dr. Kelli is amazing, and she was one of the greatest hiring successes. We'd been trying to get her on staff for a long time before we were able to get her on staff. But I am the clinical director. I'm Dr. B for long Italian name reasons. I'm a clinical psychologist. I am the clinical director over at Take This at TakeThis.org. Make sure to follow us for all the cool stuff we do. And I am a practicing psychologist in Washington State, expert on the applied use of role-playing games in therapy and learning settings. And I am generally also a fanboy of the rest of the Take This staff. So you will hear me talking up Dr. Kelli a lot today.
And Dr. B is my boss. So just to be really clear about power dynamics here.
Okay, not technically.
He's
technically report to somebody else.
Yeah, but I'm done. I'm just saying. It's fine.
I do also
HR will hear about this.
I do also want to point out for audio listeners, you are missing out on Dr. B's absolutely amazing, legally distinct building block, not Danish blocks tie that he has on.
Yeah, I got a new shipment this morning of bow ties from my new order from my bow tie guy.
I got to pick it out.
At some point, I want to be cool enough to say the statement of "I got it from my bow tie guy."
Right.
I also have a shaving soap guy
and a fez guy. You got
a hat guy.
Yeah.
Well, I don't personally know the fez guy, but I do know the CEO of the hat company I love. So
you know a guy who knows a guy. Gets you a good fez.
I know people what knows people. You want a fez? I'm the doctor. I will get you a fez.
Okay, so Mental health in video games. That is a very broad topic. But we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that when we have the awesome opportunity to talk to Dr. Dunlap here about it. So where do we want to start with this?
Well, I mean, I want to keep this brief because I usually do the why we're doing this introductions, but we have Dr. Dunlap here, who, as far as I'm concerned, is the authority on this matter. And I want to point out just that the history of not only video games, but media in general has been really, really awful when it comes to mental health representation, like not just of the way mental health, the way mental health occurs within people, but also the mental health profession as well, and the whole mental health system. And so all of that is awful. And Dr. Kelli, what do you want to say about that?
I mean, mental illness is one of those things that's incredibly scary because it's one of the only minority groups that you yourself could find yourself in at any time. There's nothing, mental health is something that everybody has. And the same way you have physical health, you have mental health. And so one of the scariest things for people can be what's within their own mind and how we perceive the world around us. And so, when we're talking about representation, we don't want to be saying like, oh, well, if we're talking about mental health, everything should be puppies and rainbows and kittens, because that's not the reality for people who have, who struggle with their mental health or have a mental illness. But there's a way to do it with like compassion and understanding. And then there's a way to do it with the opposite of compassion and understanding, with stigma and fear mongering and hatred and the propagation of really horrific stereotypes that actively do harm to others. And, it's so important because the way what we consume in our media does impact how we think about things when we don't have other options. Mm-hmm. So if the only way you ever see something portrayed in media is one way, you're going to think about it that way. And that's why diversity is so important, is if there is going to be the insane asylum, crazy villain who's doing like a lobotomy, then there also needs to be something out there counteracting that message that's just as important and powerful and palatable and popular. Mm-hmm. So that people are getting, it's okay to have these monsters, but there needs to be the other side of the story being told too. And that's one place that media, games, books, pretty much everything has really kind of fallen short in portraying of the fullness of experience, not just the wow, hallucinations and all the flashy stuff. The boring stuff is the most common.
Taking our meds.
Yes.
Which I almost forgot to do. Would have been a real interesting show.
You'd be fine. You'd be fine.
Well, but I mean, that's in my mind, a huge barrier to people accessing help, because like, I'm going to throw my own life as an example, that the way we portray autism, the way we think that we see it in the media, there's no shortage of, I think, really bad representations of either people who are, it's at two extremes, either completely non-functional, cannot exist on your own, and have to be in supervised care 24 hours a day, or the savant, who is somehow so good at a skill that their autism doesn't matter because they're useful to society. And those are two extremes that don't represent the full range of the autism experience. And, getting diagnosed 5 years ago, it's been an interesting thing to overcome. So that sort of internalized ableism, which is an ongoing process that I have, taken in because my experience is not what the movies show, not what TV shows. I'm not Bones. I'm not the good doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to think I'm a good doctor, but
love the hair flip.
I could do that now. It's so cool.
It is very cool.
Welcome.
So one of the things that we have in here in the notes that I'm interested to hear about is what should we know about mental health representation, like in games? Like you have the 3D model. What is that?
So in my research, because I'm very interested in how we talk about mental illness in games, because obviously I'm a clinical psychologist, but I'm also a game designer. And when you're playing a game, it's important to remember that experience is 100% designed. And so if there is a character that has a mental illness or is displaying symptoms, that was put there for a reason. Things were designed this way with some kind of intent. And that doesn't mean it was maliciously intended, but it can also be, things in society that we just don't really pay attention to. And so we automatically equate them The classic is, insane asylum equals bad. Well, yes, they were horrific places and they were terrifying, but guess what? They haven't been around for like 100 years. And then, yes, institutionalization,
at
even
least
up
not the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say institutionalization up until like the 70s and 80s was still pretty horrific, but nobody practices that way. The thing that always gets me is one of my favorite examples is Dead Space. And, he's wearing a straitjacket. I'm like, this is the future. We haven't used straitjackets in a very long time. Why are we using them in the future? But that's because what the straitjacket represents is danger, be afraid, mental illness, crazy insanity, unpredictability, chaos, violence, all tied up, no pun intended, in one tiny little representation of a person. And so it's really important to capture that, because previous research has looked into this, and there's not much out there. But when I did my initial search, they were trying to map movie tropes and TV tropes into video games. And you have to start somewhere. So like, I'm not taking away from those researchers at all. But, the most famous one is the homicidal maniac. And that's, the person is evil and they're the villain. And why are they trying to destroy the world? It's because they are crazy. Vague, insanity, mental illness, crazy. And so that one is really common across all media spaces. It's the most common one across all media spaces, including games. But then if you were to look at something like an insane asylum, there's not a category for environment. Or if you were to look at in games, a lot of games have sanity meters or other mechanics in the game. So it's not the location, it's not the character, it's not the narrative, it's actually the mechanic. The thing that you do in the game is a representation of mental illness. And that's not captured in these kinds of very rigid buckets because games are an interactive medium. And so they ask things, they demand things of us that other mediums don't.
So that, I mean, in and of itself, that's an interesting thing, that with the advent of more interactive media, we're seeing new and interesting ways that these tropes, and not just mental health tropes, but other tropes, whether it's gender, racial, sexual orientation stereotypes, that they play out in regards to, literally how we interact with them. It's not a passive experience like it is with, old school movies. So, God, I feel like I'm getting ahead. Like, what do we do about that? But that's later. That's later. That's in
the notes. I see it. I know where I'm putting that one up.
Yeah, but what is like in this 3-dimensional representation?
Oh, I didn't even talk about that, did I?
What is like a one-dimensional thing? Like, can you give an example of a one-dimensional representation of mental health?
Yes. So the idea of breaking it down dimensions is very much in line with my training as a clinician, that there's a lot of disorders that are on a spectrum, not just in severity, but like, depression and anxiety are kind of opposite ends of the same spectrum. And so when we're looking at, say, a one-dimensional, it's just one part of the spectrum, it's that their mental illness it's confirmed in the universe, but it doesn't matter. So the example I usually give is Heimskr, who is the Nord priest in Skyrim. Mm-hmm. And he stands outside the keep in Whiterun and he preaches about the coming of Talos. And then that's not inherently bad, but then there are the NPC chatter back and forth is, oh, well, there goes crazy old Heimskr, the town crazy person. And so you're acknowledging that this idea of mental illness exists in this world and that people feel some kind of way about it, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't change the game. It doesn't change your interactions with him. It doesn't change the story. It just kind of like, it's like a little sprinkle, a little seasoning to like flavor the world because mental illness exists. And so
that's one-dimensional, that basically it just gets a shout out.
It's flat. And it doesn't have to be bad. So for example, in Life is Strange True Colors, as we played on our Take This cast, you saw a card for someone recruiting people for group therapy.
Yep.
Doesn't do anything with the game itself. It is just an interstitial piece that exists, but it acknowledges that mental illness exists in this world. So it's just flat flavor. 2 dimensions means that the mental illness is somehow core to the person or the story or the environment. So for example, if you want to think about pretty much any of our homicidal villains, so the Joker or Kafka, those kinds, which are like, I'm crazy, so I'm going to destroy the world. And so it's core to who they are. And if you took the mental illness away, they would no longer be a character. But there's no depth to it. They're still very flat, very, if one-dimensional is a line, then 2-dimensional is a square. Like there's more shape to it.
Oh
and
my
it
God, you're
requires...
bringing in math. I did not agree.
No.
You're bringing in
Pictures.
geometry.
I'm bringing in pictures.
See,
okay, I like
pictures.
pictures.
This was a perfect example of my school experience, though, because she started talking about math, and my brain went to, what would Kefka be like if he wasn't insane? I just imagined a clown just going, I just want to rule the world. I don't know.
Everybody wants to rule the world. You know?
Somebody bring me a coffee.
I'm just too tired. I'm not motivated.
Yeah.
Where's my
I am
motivation?
tired.
I'm tired. Sorry.
Again, it doesn't have to be bad. Mitra from Overwatch is a really good example of a two-dimensional character that's not bad. So she is on the autism spectrum, and that informs her superpowers in Overwatch. And if you took it away, she wouldn't be herself. But that's, again, there's no deep understanding of that character. And then three-dimensional, of course, is the most complex. So instead of a square, think about a cube. This thing has dimensionality and it has lots of different facets, of which mental illness is just one piece. And so the best example is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. The character Senua has some kind of dissociative something going on. Like, I don't want to like label it because I haven't interviewed her, and I shy away from giving people labels that I've never talked to. And even those I have talked to. Ethics, yay. But yeah, she sees things that other people can't see. She hears things that other people can't hear. She notices patterns other people don't perceive. And so there's something going on there. But she's also a warrior, and she's a daughter, and she is a grieving woman who's lost someone very important to her, and she's vengeful, and she's flawed, and she's brave, and she's scared, and she's all these things. And if you took away the fact that she has ostensibly some kind of mental illness, she would still be a fascinating character. She would still, like, that would still be an amazing story, even if they were just like, hey, she has superpowers and she can see the world this way. Like, it wouldn't lose any of that goodness. Right. So that's the idea, is like, you can capture all of these examples of mental health and mental illness if we stop trying to put them in buckets and more of just kind of putting them on the spectrum of how much are they bringing, how much do they inform the world, and what kind of richness or stereotypes do they introduce into the story.
Well, and I mean, even as you're talking about that, I mean, I'm thinking about some of the stuff you and I have done together in the past on Take This Plays, and Alex from Life is Strange True Colors, her mental health journey is an aspect of her story as a result of the complexity of her story, that even if you took away the elements of her mental health discussions with her I think psychiatrist, was it? If you take all of that away, it's still a really compelling game and a really compelling story because of the richness. And also they make me cry. Yes.
And these two examples are really high fidelity, very narratively focused on these very human characters. And so I don't want to say like it has to be this hyper realistic thing like Life is Strange, like Hellblade, because honestly, probably the best representation of mental illness, the most authentic, the most genuine I've ever seen was Night in the Woods.
Oh God, it was good. Night in the Woods was so good.
Whose lead character is a cartoon cat.
God, yes.
And who has a ostensibly ADHD wolf, a fox friend, and a somewhat depressed alligator friend.
I will so say it.
And he
is one of us.
But like that, because it doesn't matter the vehicle that it's in. Actually, I think I can make the argument that it's easier to take in difficult stories and difficult experiences when you're not staring down the face of another human. Like having it be a cartoon cat, she can engage in ridiculousness and does. And crimes. Which brings crimes and brings a sense of levity, so you don't shut down, because what she's dealing with is really heavy. And so it doesn't have to be like super high def. If the story is genuine, if the experience is genuine and authentic and is trying to talk about something important to someone, that to me is like the gold standard.
Okay. Well, that's something I've heard from a lot of people who comment on art as a medium, and the sort of philosophy of art, that it essentially crystallizes its hyper reality. And you're bringing a really interesting point, that when we sort of when we externalize it through cartoonish or comedic imagery, the contrast of that can really draw our attention to the meat of what they're discussing. I don't know. It in some respects seemed a little bit more disturbing, having this cartoon cat and cartoon fox with bendy arms shouting, "Let's do crimes."
I have never played this game, and I'm gonna go buy it on my lunch break.
It's so good.
It's good.
And there are so many moments that I'm like, oh, I did not see that coming. Oh, that got dark. Yeah.
that got real dark. Oh, but now we're eating pizza again. Okay.
Hey,
so it's all right. And
pizza.
so just all the content warnings around it. It is ostensibly a game dealing and grappling with some pretty significant mental illness.
Very much so.
But it's also very relatable.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil anything. It's a wonderful, wonderful game. And I love it. It is my favorite in terms of representation.
Okay.
I will spoil one thing. The shop names.
Oh, they're good.
You go find yourself impossibilities. All right.
Possibilities, yeah.
Yeah.
There's actually a place near me that is called that.
Impossible. No.
Okay. Oh, it's not it's possibilities.
Yeah, the one in the game is also called Possibilities. It's not
Okay.
Impossibilities. It's
Okay.
Possibilities.
Yeah. No, I've got that place. They make a bread tube and they put spaghetti in it, and you got a spaghetti cone.
I want to go there. That sounds like
I did
kind of
once.
carb attack.
Do they have a one for the non-keto folks just called carbonara?
I don't know, and I hope they do. Okay, I did want to jump to this point because I feel like after the break we're going to answer that question that Dr. B brought up previously. However, in our notes, Dr. B, you have a pop quiz in here.
Well, before we'll get into this other thing. Yeah. So Dr. Kelly, I want to bring up some examples of some things and just get your reaction on this.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, and you brought up a couple of these already, but why is asylum horror bad?
Because it propagates the stereotype that going into a psychiatric hospital, which at this point in time is a place where you are already in distress and it's already scary. It's a place you go as a last resort, and that it just adds stigma to people seeking help in their darkest hour.
Okay, that's succinct. That's
fair.
good.
It's fair.
It's good.
It's fair. It's fair.
Well, and I know I've made this joke to you before, and I really mean this, that for somebody who's a game dev out there, maybe it's Dr. Kelly, maybe it's somebody else, but I would really love to see a game that plays with that trope of asylum horror and turns it on its head of, you've got a narrator who's like, you wake up in an asylum, a sing-song nurse comes in, there are flowers next to you, it's brightly lit, she has multiple fruit options on the breakfast tray, activities are at 10 a.m. There's ping pong. What do you do? I want to see group therapies at 2. Optional exercise at 7. I would love to see somebody take that stereotype and turn it on its head in a game. And there could be some really interesting exploration of stigma there. But let's go into a different one. Mental health providers as malevolent psychopaths.
That's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite tropes because there's not a lot of them. There's not a lot.
Okay.
But oh boy, when they show up, like when a mental health person shows up in a video game, they're evil and they're going to be like the evilest person you've ever met in games.
Yep.
And the
Hugo Strange.
Hugo Strange.
Yeah.
My go-to is Dr. Angus Bumby from the Alice series. And for anyone who may not know, he uses his position as a child psychiatrist to sex traffic children and engage in pedophilia.
Yep.
So, yeah. Yay! And because people aren't already afraid enough to go to a therapist, people aren't already, fighting stigma of like, oh, well, they're a shrink and they're not going to, they're not going to help you and they're a quack and all those other wonderful terms that get thrown around. But what is fascinating, and this is some research I'm doing right now, is I'm going through every game I can find that has a therapist or a mental health professional in it. And I'm seeing, what they look like. And it's fascinating because the mental health field, 80% of clinicians are women. So social work, masters, psychologists, 80% are women. 80% of characters are male, therapists in games. And almost all of them are white, and almost all of them look like Freud. So it's like we have this one archetype. We have one archetype of what it means to be a therapist.
Yep.
And it is Freudian. And
And they're probably evil.
Well,
absolutely going to be evil. Yeah.
It's that was one of those things that was always interesting to me, because especially at this point, there were in the course of my training, there was a lot of times where I was the only guy in a room full of 30 people. And that's I mean, that's a little bit of an extreme version, but that's the reality of the mental health field. You know, a lot of the people who come to me because finding a male therapist is kind of difficult at times. And I know you and I have a lot of things to say about the Alice series.
Oh, boy. I can just imagine having played through those games.
We don't have
that kind of time.
I think that would be a whole season.
Okay. Dedicated.
Okay, hold on. Trauma as a murder motivator.
Oh, God.
Why? Because
Dr. Kelli.
Because your life doesn't suck enough. Like, this person hasn't suffered enough. We now need to take the thing that is horrific and traumatizing and upsetting and make it normalize. Okay, like Sephiroth exception. Okay, I get it. He went through a trauma. He came out evil, but you can kind of understand how he got there. But typically, it's not treated with that kind of care.
See, that was the thing. I was going to ask, what game popped into each of our heads first?
John Wick.
That's not a game.
Well, actually, there is a John Wick game.
Okay.
Sorry, I've been watching too much. My brain actually went to Heavy Rain.
That's another good one.
The murderer's entire backstory was he had an absolutely terrible childhood and just decided to start killing people, and it was.
Isn't that also the plot of Hitman? I've never played the Hitman games, but I'm pretty certain that's the origin story of Hitman as well.
Yeah, probably.
Traumatic childhood. Now I'm a murderer.
In and of itself, that's the thing. That just because, I worked in a prison system, and yes, a lot of the guys I worked with had the childhoods you would absolutely imagine, but that doesn't mean that everybody who had those childhoods. I had some stuff in my childhood. I think I turned out relatively okay. The expression was great. Takes out notebook.
Oh boy. Any other one of these that you want to run by before we do our,
here. Well,
our break?
Why not insanity meters?
It reduces the complexity of mental health down to something as complex as a dipstick. Like, how well is your mental health today? Let's stick it in and find out.
Oh my
look
God.
At that. Look at that. You need to refill. It's not that you can't ever use it. Like,
I never thought of it like that, but that's such a perfect way of describing. Like, my head always goes to Eternal Darkness, and it's literally a meter. It is just like, yep, okay, nope, that's perfect.
And I mean, one thing that I do like about sanity meters is that it's something that is consistent between board games and video games. Like, video games directly took that from like Call of Cthulhu type games, and Dungeons and Dragons, I think, if I remember right, has the very first mechanic of, and you were rolling a D100. I believe it was D&D Adventures in 1970.
Yeah, that's what I recall of our conversation when you proved me wrong.
Yeah, I do that.
I thought it was Call of Cthulhu, and then Dr. Kelli
D&D
went and
got it. But that's the thing, is like, it's kind of baked into that history, and it's not, in theory, mechanically, it's not a bad idea. But when you extrapolate that beyond like just the mechanic and what the interpretation and the experience of the player is, and what it might say to someone who is maybe not in the best mental health space, there can be things that brought out in that. Now there are some games. What is it called? I cannot think of it. It's on one of my slides. I will think of it in a second. But you play as a group, and when you hit a certain stress level, you either have something bad happen to you, or you can have like something good happen to you. And so like your stress recharges and things like that. So there's a way to recover from like loss of sanity.
Darkest Dungeon.
Thank you. Yes. There's a fantastic paper digging into the mental health representation in Darkest Dungeon. Highly recommend it. It's super nerdy and it's fantastic.
I want to read it.
Darkest Dungeon is a weird game because it's the only time in my life I have yelled the words, "Really? You get paranoid now?"
Yeah. So there's a lot to that, but that's one of those things where they're obviously playing with mental illness and sanity in a mechanical way, but they're seeing it as something more than a dipstick. Like there is complexity, there is depth to it. And I think that makes it so much more interesting. The fact that you can recover, because the major issue with most of the time sanity meters is once you lose it, it's gone.
Yeah.
There's no way to recover. There's no coming back. You are a lost cause and death is a mercy, which I think is a really dangerous narrative to play out again and again and again.
Yep.
Yeah. I think I've seen those words used in various TTRPG source books over the last couple of decades. Death is a mercy at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And
yeah.
We don't want to go there.
No.
Eugenics. No.
Nope.
Let's go ahead and take a break for our to remind our viewers and listeners of our disclaimer, and then we'll be right back to talk about some ways that it is done well. So we'll be right back.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Okay, so we've talked about some definite ways that things go wrong in video games, but who's doing this well? Who has good? We talked about Sinuous Sacrifice and stuff like that, but like what are some games or companies that are getting this right?
Well, can I jump in and give a plug to Take This on it? Well, one of the things Take This has been doing for now 4 years is that we've actually been offering a biennial award to video games who do really good compassionate representation in mental health. It's named after our original clinical director, my predecessor, Dr. Mark Klein, the Dr. Mark Award. And the previous winners are Stardew Valley was the first one. The second one was Celeste. And we actually are going to be finding out the 2022 Dr. Mark Award winner in about a month and some change at the time of PAX West. But the nominees that we have this year are really good. Psychonauts 2, Cozy Grove, Chicory, A Colorful Tale. God, I'm trying to think what were the other ones that I had on there that the community voted in. Chicory, A Colorful Tale. Oh, I'm totally blanking. I got 3 out of 5.
It's fair.
Spiritfarer and Life is Strange. Life is Strange True Colors. Yeah, those were the 5 nominees, and all of them are really good.
That Spiritfarer was a trailer that I watched and said that looks like an absolutely fantastic game that I'm not going to play because I don't want to cry.
I maintain when we played it on Take This Plays, I maintained not being able to cry, but just barely.
Yeah, that's a game you have to go in being willing to cry. And I don't think I would stream Spiritfarer. That's one of those games I think that would be just for me. Because boundaries are good. But in terms of
who else does it well?
Well, someone mentioned Psychonauts as well. I know they reached out and Dr. B wrote the content warning for the Psychonauts 2.
I may not have actually written it, but I definitely helped revise
it.
I can't remember.
Okay.
I can't remember. There was a lot of back and forth.
But that's an example of like, okay, that's low hanging fruit. It's literally text before the game. Like this is something everyone can do is to have a good content warning about what's going on in this game and things that you should be aware of. So that's something that an unlikely place is Halo. I'm a massive Halo fangirl. And I typically tear into Halo 1 and 2 and sometimes Reach about the representation that goes on in there, which isn't, I know we'd have to get real deep. But the thing that I like is that in the games, like when you're competing, when you fall off a level or whatever, or you blow yourself up with the rockets, it used to be called suicide. And so the announcer would go suicide.
Yep.
But now it's self-destruct. And I think that's
change.
such a beautiful, it's so tiny.
Yeah.
Nice change.
So minuscule. It's just a tiny little thing. But I want to like hug anybody at 343 who made that happen because it's it means a lot. It is a big deal. So like even just something that small in a shooter space of all places, they're taking steps to kind of destigmatize and break things down. And so that's where I'm really excited to see, because there are games out there that, there's all the Dr. Mark Award nominees that Bea mentioned, and tons of small little indie games out there, like What Comes After, and If Found, and What Remains of Edith Finch.
Oh
and
God, that game.
Oh goodness, what is it?
That's called? A tearjerker.
Yeah, and there's so many games out there that are exploring this type of content in a really thoughtful, genuine, kind way, but they tend to be really small. They tend to be small indie devs, and so they don't really get kind of the airtime and the publicity that maybe you would hope for something to kind of like spread this message of destigmatization. But that's why seeing something like in Halo means so much. Or in Call of Duty, the fact that they let you skip the no Russian scene so that you do not have to shoot up an airport full of civilians in order to progress the plot. You actually can nope out of that and not be penalized. Like there's no achievement, there's no gamer score, there's nothing associated with that level. So that if you skip it, you're not actually being punished. You can actually protect your own mental health in that way.
That's such a great feature. I just turning back to Psychonauts for a sec. One of the things I want to point out, we did so take this, and me specifically, we did more than just more consultation on that game than just the starter screen. And one of the things that I really loved about how they approached it is how consensual in the second game entering somebody's mind was. That was something that the whole team was very, very concerned about because of the possibility for abuse in that respect. And that goes into a whole lot of stereotypes and tropes about the way mental health professionals have been over the course of the last many centuries. I mean, like, how many evil, malevolent hypnotism things do you think of when you Mad Hatter and Batman? I'm going back to so many Batman villains.
I mean, the first game was literally Arkham Asylum.
Yeah. I mean,
can't knock you for that.
No.
I love that game, but yeah, no, it's not great in that respect.
Well, and also shout out to D&D and the latest Ravenloft book.
Yes.
I mean, it's Dr. Kelly mentioned that a lot of really cool stuff is being done in indie spaces, but to see the big kid on the block in terms of tabletop RPGs incorporate some of the ideas that are being explored in indie space in really a positive manner. They changed insanity meters in the latest Ravenloft book to stress levels. And there were definite definite ways of recovering from stress, and stress has effects. They took those effects and made them not personal. It's not a personal flaw. It is a result of environmental stressors, which is so cool to see.
Because of that, I've actually, because I do enjoy the Call of Cthulhu board games and card games. Like my wife and I play the Arkham card game a lot, but we've actually taken that language from that book, and so now when we have the little brain things, instead of saying sanity, we call them stress. And so we've exchanged other games' poor choice of language with some better ones. That's just better to say around the table than "I'm going insane," and
which isn't even a mental health term; it's a legal term.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other things you two want to bring up on this before we check in with chat?
Well, I want to know Dr. Kelly's take on how do we do this better, especially at our home games for tabletop RPGs, because even if we have an educated or if we have, we'd like to think a fairly enlightened take on mental health or any sort of representation, anytime we are portraying somebody else's experiences, it is filtered through our own understanding. So what's your take on how we can do this well at the gaming table?
So I'll first say I'm not an expert in tabletop. So my home is a digital, and they are very, very different, because in digital you have to design everything, and everything is locked in. Your play space is limited, whereas in a tabletop game, your play space really is unlimited, based on whoever's running it. So I think the most important thing is, or one thing to keep in mind is, why are you introducing this? So if you want to bring in a story or a narrative or a character or an experience that deals with any kind of marginalized or vulnerable population, really having a moment to check in with yourself. Why am I doing this? Is it because I think it's going to add shock value? Because let me tell you, that is probably the number one thing I hear. You know, when I harp on Life is Strange, the original one, and the scene, there's a scene where a character dies by suicide. And they're like, well, you shouldn't put a content warning because then it loses its impact. And I'm like, well, then you're doing it wrong if that's the only way you can get impact. And so really asking yourself, why am I bringing this? And am I doing it for me? Am I doing it for my players? You know, what is this doing for the story? You know, why am I bringing this into the situation? Is it because I think it's cool? Well, that's probably not a good enough reason. So, you know, being open and honest, and then of course, communicating that with your players and having like consent be 100% upfront. And, you know, when you do your session 0, or if you're mid game and you're bringing in something, sit down and talk with your players about, hey, I'd like to bring this in. Does anybody have any issues? Like, you can DM me on the side or something. If you don't want to do it or are uncomfortable. I mean, there's a million different ways that RPGs, like safeties in place that digital games don't have. And I love the use of X cards and veils and all those kinds of things. So using those tools, and then, you know, when in doubt, ask. You know, there are people out there who are experienced DMs. There are people out there who are psychologists. There are people like Dr. B who are both and can answer those kinds of questions. And if I always default, if you're asking the question, you're probably doing okay, because you're probably already putting more thought into it than most other people.
Yeah, and I will say shout out to Obo Lauren, who said something during a conversation on this topic I will never forget. Just because you're aware of the roller coaster's safety checks doesn't mean you're not going to enjoy the roller coaster.
Yeah. Funny. And in fact, you might need those safety checks, because if I got on a roller coaster and I didn't know if it passed inspection, I don't think I'd have as much fun.
Yeah.
Is it going to fall apart? Who knows?
And I'll be honest, I would have been real chill if that Harry Potter ride at the beginning had been like, by the way, we're going to throw a giant spider at your face about halfway through this. Enjoy.
Ooh, spoilers.
Well, yeah. I will say that as somebody who struggles with multiple mental health issues, as somebody who's autistic, somebody who's ADHD, somebody who's largely because of those struggled with chronic depression, and my family has an extensive history of mental health challenges that are just really significant. I hate it when people make it a joke at the gaming table. There's when people who have no experience with that, it's just a punchline. And so to build on Dr. Kelly's point, I'd say ask yourself why you're doing it. Are you doing it just for an effect, or are you doing it because you're trying to explore something meaningful? And then if you are trying to explore something personally meaningful, treat it with reverence.
And I guess the last thing I'll add, I'll just yes and to that, is do not ask the person at your table, if you have someone with that experience, to teach you. Like, I would never sit down at a table and say, okay, I want to run an autism ADHD themed D&D game.
I've already stopped paying attention.
It's a difficult boundary, because on one hand, yes, you want to go to the source to understand and to be genuine and to, like, again, it has the reverence to understand the thing that you're trying to run, but putting that on one person to speak for an entire community and to represent all of that, and then have them do the emotional labor.
Yeah.
Like if B was like, hey, Kelly, I want to run Gamergate, the D&D game. Could you tell me what it was like to be a competitive esports player during Gamergate? I would say, goodbye. No, that's not my job. No. But if you wanted to run that, would I expect him to do the due diligence and do the research? And yes, I would. So you've got to find that middle ground of don't make one person the representative for the entire marginalized group. And if you don't have the skills to do it, don't run it. If it's not your story to tell, don't tell it.
Yeah.
As soon as you said ADHD and autism game, I just kind of heard white noise. Just this is all bad.
I actually do remember. God, it might have been a year or two ago that someone actually did put up something about having ADHD as a D&D background and all of the negatives that it brought on, and I was just like, I would love to burn this digital thing to the ground. How do I burn this to the ground?
I know what you're talking about. I have opinions on it. We'll talk after.
But okay, let's check in with chat real quick and see what they've been
There have been a lot of questions.
There have been a lot of questions.
So many questions.
We're not going to be able to get to all of them. I have picked out a few.
Challenge accepted.
We'll go Silly Simon 666. Great name.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Silly Simon 666.
Say it again, real fast.
Silly Simon 666. Question: Video games get a bad rap as a cause of bad real life behavior. Are video games good or bad for mental health?
Yes.
No. Oh my gosh.
Oh boy.
Video games are a play space. And we like to go into our play spaces and explore the possibilities within them. We like to practice and learn and grow and experiment. But what we do in our play space is not who we are outside of our play space. That's the reason I can go into Halo and get a headshot from across Blood Gulch and possibly maybe celebratory crouch on the person I got.
Kelly,
Listen,
no!
I was my first day. You're just bringing that up.
You know, your little action there. And you know what? But would I ever do? No. So no, you do not. I mean, it just the thing around the violence. I'm so irritated with this. You know, the idea of like, well, video games cause real world violence. Really? You know, because I don't know how to shoot a gun. I certainly don't know how to shoot a sniper rifle, but I'm a deadly shot in Halo. And so just because you're doing something in a game does not mean it translates to real life. That's why education games largely don't work either, is because that transfer doesn't really work. So they do get blamed because it's really easy to see. When you see something obvious, like, oh my gosh, you know, Mortal Kombat 1991, you're ripping somebody's skull out. Look at all the blood. Everybody freak out.
Fatality.
It's very clear. It's very A to B, but humans are incredibly complex. And so, yeah, this is why we've just said yes and no, because you could, like, there are dissertations on this.
Yeah.
Anything that's simplistic or reductionistic is going to be doing a disservice. Not saying that the person asking the question is, but if someone's trying to explain to you, oh, video games are bad, or even video games are good. Well, no, they're just they're an art form. They're a way of communication. They're a play space. Like a playground is not good or bad. Yes, you can play on it and get energy out.
It depends on your childhood, because I would argue.
The
complexity.
I mean, obviously, I am not a mental health professional anyway, but like anytime that conversation's like been brought up in like family or anything like that, I've been like, okay, if you're playing Halo to the point that you are screaming at people online and sending them hateful messages, you're a jerk, and maybe you should explore that more. And the video game is just being an avenue for you to be a jerk. Dark Souls helped me with my depression, so like there's goods and bads.
Yeah. And that's because there's something inherent, like you can design things to be helpful. You can design things to be harmful. So, you know, that's a level of complexity there. But like when we say games, like chess is a game. Yeah. Are you trying to tell me that, like,
I mean, if you flip over a chess table and be like, I think you need to do something with your mental health before you play another chess game.
Rage quitting this chess game.
Yeah.
Well, chess is a good example, because chess, one of the original posits for chess is that it was essentially to build wartime strategy. It's, you know, to help troop movement. And, you know, chess is, you know, a game 3,000 years old, depending on, by the way, well, depending on how you want to argue it, because look at John Peterson's work from 2012.
Wait, are you trying to tell me that chess is actually a COD expansion?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Chess is full of COD pieces. That's what I'm saying. But yeah, John Peterson's work looked into that, but in its proto form. Anyway, sorry. But you are going to correct me so bad once this is over, aren't you?
I'm just waiting for you. So one of the classes I teach is games history and society, where we talk about the history and evolutions of games
She's like,
throughout
he
time.
Is full of crap. So certain.
3,000 years. Okay.
Okay. Let's check. Let's do this one real quick. This is from M Kamui. I don't know how to say your name, and I apologize for that. I think it is M Kamui. Yeah, that's the best of my attempt to do it. But what do you all think about Lovecraft games in the perspectives of the mental health approach?
Depends on the game, but
the reason I picked this one out is because I do think that kind of one of the ones that at the center of all this are Lovecraftian games, the ones that are just like, there's some eldritch horror that'll drive you mad and all that stuff. And that does seem to kind of be the staple of those sorts of games where you have the sanity meter, you have the asylum full of people who are, turned suddenly evil and trying to kill you and everything like that. I said before the show that I'd recently played one of those. I played the Arkham horror game that's on a bunch of consoles and whatnot, and sure enough, there's one who's like, oh no, we gotta find this piece of evidence, and then the insane asylum. I'm like, this isn't gonna go well, is it? And we get in there, and immediately there's guys in their straight jackets that are trying to kill you, and I'm just like, come on.
So I don't do Lovecraft. I don't like horror of any kind. I've got enough real anxiety in my life. I don't need artificial anxiety in my off time. But I think it's the idea, the equivocation of poor mental health, of suffering leading to violence. That is always incredibly problematic for me. Like, can we explore the terror that is inside the human mind? I mean, I'm a therapist and I do that like every day. And I think that's an important exercise, that kind of reflexive and looking into those dark corners and shining lights on things that we don't talk about and things that are taboo and things that, I like that it's talking about it, it's at least trying to talk about it. But then those stigmas and stereotypes come in of, again, like mentally ill means violent, even though someone with a mental illness is 10 times more likely to be the victim of violence than somebody without a mental illness. And all of violent crime is only 3% of violent offenders have a mental health diagnosis. So just like that perception, I think, needs to be separated. That's a trope that needs to stop, that mentally ill means either completely worthless and useless and a drain on society, or dangerous and violent and chaotic and needs to be put down. So if you can extract those things from it, then like more power to you. So yeah.
I will embrace my future violent role. As, I don't know. I think the tie is one step closer to Joker wear.
Yeah, let's get you some rouge.
I definitely. I'm gonna rouge it up. Yeah,
some jigsaw swirls.
Such a rouger.
Okay. My this last question is coming from Mindtrosity. Question: I'm a Swedish psychologist student. Did internship as a school psychologist. Thinking of a subject for my master thesis in psychology representation in video games. Sounds amazing. Which advice can you give? Can you recommend any good resources and works?
I will give you advice and good resources, and both of them are Dr. Kelly.
I was gonna say, hi, my name's Dr. Kelli Dunlap, and that's what I write about. So please get at me. Can I drop my Twitter in the chat?
We actually have it below you right there. But if you want to put it in there as well, you absolutely can. Check out Kelly's Twitter and reach out to her about that. Okay, well, I think that is a good place for us to wrap up because we have a show coming up right after this. Dr. Kelli Dunlap, thank you so much for joining us today. This was an absolute blast.
You're amazing.
Yeah, as you can tell, I love talking, period. And I love talking about this in particular. So thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Where can people find you on the interwebs if they would like to do so? Is Twitter the best place?
So I pretty much live on Twitter. Twitter is a really good place to go. So it's at Kelli Dunlap. So it's my name. It's my name. That is like the best way to get a hold of me. I have a website, which is dunlappsyd.com, which is not great for SEO, but it's my last name and then my degree, psyd.com. And you can find me there. I'm pretty much, what's really cool is if you like Google video game psychologist, I'm like the #2 hit.
Hey, that's pretty cool.
And if you do Kelli, Kelli, video game psychologist, I'm going to be the only one to see. So thank you, Mom and Dad, for giving me a name spelled in a unique way.
Dr. B, where can people find you if they would like to do so?
I'm around on all the socials at the Dr. B. That's TheEedoctorB as in boy. But it is more important that you follow Take This at Take This org on all the socials to see all the cool resources and free information and education on mental health that we have on there. So much of it has either been written or designed to be way prettier than I would make it by Dr. Kelly, who has forbidden me from ever using mustard yellow ever again. Outside
you don't understand. He made a small graphic that had like bricks that were mustard yellow, and then he put red
buddy,
red on top with a white stroke.
It was a choice.
It was
I
like
do
a
mental health,
mustard
not
and
design.
ketchup bottle vomited all over each other.
It was diner chic.
no.
Diner.
No.
All right, I think that's where we're gonna wrap up there.
Mm-mm.
Dr.
This is where we stop.
Dr. Kelli Dunlap, once again, thank you so much for joining us. You can find me on Twitter at the Treavor. There is an A hiding in there. You can also find me anywhere the Owl Champions community is, because I'm the community manager. And that's where I'll be. Thank you so much to Martin and Jordan for moderating in the chat today and doing a fantastic job. And thank you to Codename Entertainment and Take This for giving us a chance to have these conversations. If you missed any part of the show, you can catch it later on our YouTube channel or as a podcast on your favorite podcast service. I think we've got the rest of the day pretty normal. Bardic Inspiration is coming up in a few minutes, so we've got to run. So that's going to do it for this week's show. So until next week, take care of yourself.
Bye.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.